For those of you who don't know, Zoom has this weird chat setting where you have to decide who you want to talk to. So just make sure if you want to chat with everybody and not just the host and panelists, then to select that, just so you're aware. It tripped me up in our last webinar.
So, Catherine, you have to allow me sharing my.
I will do that. Okay, let me do that now. You should be allowed.
Yeah, I think we need that for later. No, still not.
I think it might take a second. I just adjusted that, so we will see. I know where the setting is now, though, so.
Ah, okay, I see. I got a different message that now tells me that I cannot share my screen as long as you're doing that. So this makes sense.
Good, that's intentional.
So we almost can start the countdown.
I've started it. It's winding down.
4, 3, 2.
The anticipation.
Take off.
Okay, welcome to part 2 of our 3-part data webinar series. My name is Catherine. I'm joined here by Thomas. And today, Thomas is going to walk us through how to push data from a Google Sheet to your Singular graphics using the Singular REST API. We're going to teach this method to demonstrate an example of an external application using the Singular REST API to send data. So some of you might be wondering what the difference is between pushing data from a Google Sheet via this REST API method and using a Google Sheet widget in your composition. The Google Sheet widget method involves pulling data from the Google API. And if you use it frequently, you can run into Google's set API limits, which we don't have control over. So there are other differences between the widget method and the method we're going to cover today. But this is a key distinction. So if you're looking to upgrade your Google Sheets integration across the board, then this is going to be a really, really informative session. So in summary, today we're going to cover a quick recap of part 1 from last week, what we covered, an introduction to the Google Apps script, how to read cells and ranges from the apps script, how to use the UrlFetchApp service for sending REST calls to Singular. And then as a little bonus at the end, we're going to talk about automatically pulling in data into your cell ranges using Google functions like the finance function, and then pulling in RSS feed data. And there's all sorts of other stuff you can do with that. So with that, I think we're ready, Thomas, to start.
Great. Thank you, Catherine, for the introduction. And welcome to part 2 of the webinar. So let me share my screen and move this a little bit aside. So the recap will be very short and very fast. So let's have a look at the compositions and the components of the compositions which you use for building it. We start with widgets, add control nodes, link control nodes to widget properties. You may use data nodes or even composition scripts in your composition already. All those modules, all those components, they have APIs, they can receive data, and some of them, they can reach out and query data from other APIs. As Catherine already mentioned, in this webinar, we still focus on the REST API and update control nodes, which then are mapped to widget properties. So let's have a look and add the composition into an app instance. The app instance is what provides a unique set of output URLs and REST URLs and the app token. Using the REST API URL, you can exactly address control nodes in your outputs of your app instance. So, and I think that that's all we need for the beginning and as a recap. Let's start and jump right into it. Catherine prepared for this webinar composition and shared it on the template library, so you can download it then to your account and well, follow all the steps which we are doing there. And the template is called, well, webinar. You'll find it under resources, or just type in webinar here to locate it. There we go. The description of this control app, it has a link, and it's a link to the Google Sheet in the finished version, which we are building now. And I'll download this composition to my dashboard, and there we go. So let's have a look at it. The composition is contains the same elements we've used last week, with the lower header, with a lower and drop line, and then another lower which has breaking news text shown here. But I will just keep focusing on the lower header as last week. In addition, we added 3 more sub-compositions that we are going to use. One is full screen graphics. That's we call that single stock details. And the single stock details, it has a couple of widgets and text linked to control nodes for the name of the ticker, for the price change, high and low values, and the volume. So the payload, well, it looks like that, and we'll have a closer look at that later. We choose using these particular names because that makes it for us really easy then map later from the Google Sheet the values to this payload. So then there is another composition. It's the multi-stocks composition, where we see well, stocks in a table, and what we'll address there is sending table payloads and generating table payloads from the Google Sheet and sending it to a control node. The last one which we've added, it's the baseline ticker. The baseline ticker, well, it has source, which is just mapped here to this to the text, and then the text ticker is mapped to ticker messages. There's one thing, a couple of things that I would want to point out here is, well, you can add ticker messages in one line, as many as you want, but when you add it into one line, it still appears as one message. The text ticker splits messages by a new line character. So what you see there is that message 1, 2, 3, they're pretty close together, and the padding, which you can set here between the ticker messages, applies then whenever you enter a new line. Also, what you can do is you can add an image separator, and I'll add the singular logo. Let me make that a little bit bigger, something like that, and then the logo, it appears between messages of new lines. What I'll just remove here is the messages which the text I've edited before, and so now we'll see how this actually works. A nice feature of the text ticker also is that you can use HTML text. And HTML text allows you to define colors or to define bold text and some nice highlight effects. When I use here, instead of crimson, I'll use a yellow text. There we go. Then the first part of the second message yellow, and then the rest is just standard white as selected here in the font settings. Okay.
So this is also similar to the text widget as well, right? You can use HTML in the standard text widget, just so you guys are aware.
There's a little difference between the HTML and the text widget. The text widget requires you to add an HTML tag at the beginning, an open HTML tag at the beginning, and a close HTML tag at the end. The text ticker does that internally for you.
Okay.
Okay, great. So let's have a look there. We don't need the header drop line and the header breaking news, so I'm just going to delete them.
Okay.
So now, as we have our composition, we are going to load it into an UNO Essential app. So creating an app, it provides these URLs, the output URL, the API URL, and the app token, which is unique and for this particular app. Well, with the API URL, you can copy it and just paste it into the browser. Just a recap from last week. And by doing that, the browser sends a GET request to the Singular server, which then returns all the control properties for this particular app instance. And at the beginning, there are the colors that we set in the root composition. Then that's our multi-stocks composition with the payload of the table. Then here's the lower header with the header and the main text, the single stock details, and down there the baseline ticker with the yellow color that we've just entered before.
And just to add really fast, Thomas does have that add-on in there that formats the data in the way that it's parsed. Yeah. So
yeah,
I think we sent a link in the description of the first part 1 of this webinar series on YouTube. So if you just go in there, all the stuff that we used in that should be in that description. So.
Okay, great. So now we have the control app. I'll open it. And with the control app, then we can control all the various apps or subcompositions, animate them in and animate them out. But we'll stay with the lower header there. And the layout, what I'll do is I'll keep it to auto, and I'll just move this a little bit here to this side. So let's start with a Google Sheet. Let's add a Google Sheet. Let me find there is the lower header. So I'll add the Google Sheet to my drive. There we go. Just edit, and I'll name that. This is a webinar part 2. So we're going to create multiple sheets in that spreadsheet. So we have to name them properly, and I'll use the name of the subcompositions we're going to send data to. That's my lower header. And within the lower header, what we want to add is just adding some labels. That's the label for the header and the main text. And here we say that's the header from the Google Sheet, and that's the main text from the Google Sheet. There we go.
So in column B, Thomas, what you typed there is the name of those control fields, correct? The header and then.
It could be. I will use that a little later. In this case, it's just a label, so that the user knows enter the header text in this field, enter the main text in the field below.
So if you spell it differently than what it is in your control interface, that doesn't necessarily matter at this stage.
for this particular example, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Later, and I will point that out, it will matter.
Okay.
Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to add some scripting to the Google Sheet. And it's some app scripting. You'll find the menu in the Extensions tab. And when you select it, it opens up a new browser tab with a scripting project. What I'll usually do is I'll keep the names of the script project the same, just to be consistent. And then it's easier for me to find the scripts that and reuse scripts that I've wrote for a specific Google Sheet. So how do app scripts work? So the app scripts are, there we go, I'll bring up this here. The app scripts provide a lot of functions that allow you to access data from Google Apps, from Google applications, modify that. You even can write your own UIs as a side panel or in a separate window using app scripts. In our example, what we use is we just use the Google Sheets function, and you'll see that as really a lot. And from all the functions that the Google Sheets API provides, we'll use the spreadsheet app. We'll take the active spreadsheet, that's that spreadsheet where the script is running in. And then from there, further, what we want to do is we want to get the range, so which allows us to read cells.
Did you just search for that? Sorry,
yes,
what did you just do there? You searched, okay.
Yeah, I searched for that, and I typed in prior to the webinar, so I don't need to say.
I'm revealing your secrets. Okay, so it would have been in that sidebar there on the left. You could find that particular.
Yeah, when you click there, it opens up a more detailed link in here, and now we are already in the get range.
Okay.
And then there, what we exactly use is we use the where is it? We use functions to get the value and to get the value of a single cell and get the value of an array of cells. Okay, so far so good. So now let's.
And when you say array, you mean a range, right? Of
yeah, a range,
which I'm sure most people know that already, but
yeah, a range is a part of this of the cell that you define it, that you want to read and manage in your Google Sheet.
Okay. So
let's define our first function. And the function, okay, no, it's not a typo, and we call that it's read cell value. I think that's a good name for it, and that's our first function. What it takes as an argument is we'll take the cell ID in the A1 format, which is the standard format. And what we want to read is the value of the cell, and we get it from the spreadsheet app, and we get the active spreadsheet. So there is and is already a suggestion there, so which is really and from the active spreadsheet we'll get the range. There we go, and the range that we will request is defined in this A1 parameter, and then we only just need to get the value, and it's only one value here because we want to read the content of a single cell. So then we'll just do a console log, and so to see what we actually the content of this cell and the function also returns this value. There we go. That's already pretty good. Let me save that. So there's a little bit more what we need to do now. We need to call this function. And what we'll do right away is we'll add another function, which we want them to use to send these two cells to the lower header subcomposition. So that's why we call it, let's send our lower header. There's no argument required. And what we want is to first just request the header, and this reads the cell value, and the cell value requires the cell, the sheet name, which is lower header, and then the cell ID, which is C2. Yeah, so we're gonna pass that as an argument, and we have to quote that because there is there are some spaces in there, and we said it's C2. Oh, it's already pretty good. So now the next one is our main text, and the main text is in cell 3, C3, which is this cell here. Cool. So now we have two functions which we already can test. So the send lower header function, at the moment it doesn't send anything, but it will pretty soon. It already requests the cell values there. From this drop-down menu, I can select the function which I want to run or to debug. Run means just run the function. Debug means I can add stop points there, break points there. And when I click debug, the app script, Google runs the app script until this point. The first execution usually takes a bit longer because what Google does is Google analyzes the script code and calculates all the permissions that are required from the user to run this script. And so I can review the permissions as my Google user, and it says, well, see, it can edit, create, delete Google Sheets and spreadsheets. That's what I'm working on, so I allow it, and there we go. So now the script runs, it stops there. Well, so far we didn't execute anything, so I can step over functions, and there we see we already get an info. It says value header from Google Sheet. That's the first value. You also can see the local variables there. When I step over the next one, the main text also had been updated and read from the Google Sheet, and I can just run the function to the end. There we go. Okay, let's have another look. Add some dots here and just run the function again. So we should see now the new text. Right, there is the new text which we have here. Okay, so the next part is creating the payload that we want to send to Singular using REST. And therefore, I'll just open the Postman collection, which we shared last week, and we'll share this link in the chat. This Postman collection.
Can you send that to me
Sure.
right now?
Well, actually,
I can drop it in there, or if you want to drop it in.
Drop it in there. So, and yeah, you can download the Postman collection using this button and run it locally in your Postman app, or also in the web application from Postman. So let's go to this one that we update our lower header. Just click here, and that's the payload which we need to build to send the header and main text to the lower header subcomposition. So that's easy. So I copied it. And now let me put that into a variable. There we go. And I use a shortcut, which is really nice. It formats the code in a nice way. So that's the payload. And the only thing what we need then to do is to replace the text, which is there, by whatever this function returns. And instead of using the variables, I'll just call the function down there and copy and paste it. And we can get rid of these two variables, so we save some lines. Great. So that's our payload. Let's have another look at this function. So I added the breakpoint there, and we see the payload. The payload has the composition name. It has the control nodes and the control node content from the Google Sheets, and we'll see the dots that we've previously added. So that's exactly what we want. So next step is we want to send that now finally using REST to Singular. So therefore, the app scripts provide a service called UrlFetch, and it's the UrlFetchApp which we are going to use there. The UrlFetchApp, just click there. So it has a couple of examples there which are really neat. We almost can copy and paste them. So for a GET request, it just requires the URL. But what we want is we want a PUT request which requires us to send data. So therefore, we'll, for example, copy and paste this post request. It has data and it prepares everything in a nice way. So I copy it. And we'll add a function up here, and I call that function singular put. That's what we do. And I just copy and paste it and format the code. Nice. So let me clean up this code a little bit. We don't want any comments there. So this data and options, they are preparing the content for the actual fetch command. And the fetch is executed here. And there is the URL, which we want to pass to the function as a parameter. So we'll say that's my URL. And then we have data. We don't need that data here. We also want to pass this data as a parameter. Great. So there we go. So now let's test this. Actually, there's one more thing which we need to look into, because what we copied here is a post command, and what Singular requires is a put command, which is here. So we need to update the method for the URL fetch and just replace the post by put, and that's actually all we need. There we go, and we set in the API URL, which we still need to define, and send the payload there. So the API URL is missing, and that's a constant for our entire project. So I'll put it at the very top. It's the API URL, and the API URL for our composition is. I have it here, right? It's this one. You also find it again in the dashboard. When you click this info button, I think that's the easiest way to locate it there. So, and I'll copy and paste.
And it's that shared API URL, right? In that info.
Yeah, it's the shared API URL, and we'll use the shared API URL because that's the easiest way to send data to Singular. And you can update the shared token, the shared API URL, and this changes, and you also would need to update then your app script. So there we go. So we have a function send lower header. this function reads the cell values for the header text and for the main text, which is C3, and then we'll pass the API URL from up here into our singular put function and the payload too. Great. I think we are ready to test this. And
just so you guys are aware, in the template library, when you download that this example comp, there's also a link in the description that goes to a completed Google Sheet. So everything that we will be doing now is completed there. So you'll see that. You don't have to try and remember this right now or scrub back. It's going to be there in that sheet for you.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just run this function and see what happens. Okay. So Google requires us to review permissions. Why is that? We've been adding a new function. It's the UrlFetchApp service. And this FetchApp service, it sends requests to an external URL. And that's where we have to review the permissions and allow then our app script to use this service and to access it. There we go. And now
nice.
Function runs and it updates our Google Sheet. Okay, so let's change that. Let's say that's the webinar.
The German way of spelling webinar.
Well,
not quite.
Okay, send data from Google Sheet. There we go. Okay, so we changed the content and I'll just run it again. And well, as expected, it updates the composition, and we also see the corresponding data here in the essential URL. Great. So next step, what we want to do is, of course, we don't want always to open the app script editor. What we do is we'll add a button for the user to click. How do we do that?
To send to run it, right? To send the data, to say, hey, I want to run the script. Okay.
To particular trigger this function. So there are a few options to do that, and you can find all of them somewhere in the Google Sheet description. What I'll show you is a very simple one, which I heavily use for testing. So I'll add a drawing. I'll take a simple geometry, something like this, and say that's my send button. There we go. I'll center the text. I'll make it bold. It looks a little bit nicer. Save it. So now I have a drawing. You'll notice these 3 dots. When you click there, you either can edit the drawing, change it, change colors, fonts, probably add more information, delete it, or assign a script. And that's exactly what I want to do. I want to assign a script that's executed when a user clicks this button. And the script is called the lower header. So I copy paste it there, done. So now let's test it. I'll add 3 dots here and 3 exclamation marks down there. And then I'll click the send button. And what happens is
it didn't send.
The
main text?
Yes and no. It updates the header, but it didn't update the main text. Why? Let's have a look at actually how Google scripts and Google app scripts are processed and handled by Google. When you load your Google Sheets apps, it runs in the browser and you enter the code locally. When you execute a function, then the Google app and Google Sheets connects through the Google Cloud to the Google servers on the backend. And it's actually the function on the Google servers on the backend, which executes then the call that we've selected and sends data to Singular. But the Google Sheet app, it only sends data and updates data to the backend once you've exited the cell. So as long as it's in edit mode, it's locked. But once you've exited it, then Google sends the data to the backend and executes the function with the new data. Now let's see if it works. There we go. Great. That's exactly what we want. So
it's kind of a protective measure. It seems like it's like, oh, you're editing this. We probably should not send this data. So.
Yeah, it's also to keep the traffic a little bit down, because we don't want to create traffic with every character that's typed into a Google Sheet. So it's a defined state. When you just exit the cell, then
that makes
the
sense.
new data, and you finished editing content. Okay, good. So that's the first part. Let's have a look at the next example. And so we're going to look at this single stocks position. Probably just have a look quick into the composition itself. There we go. And the composition, it has all the control node fields defined. So the ID and the title is the name, is the same. It's important that when sending data through the REST API, that you always look at the ID, because that's what's required then, and what defines then your JSON data and your JSON data structure. Okay, so how do we handle and attack that? Let me add another sheet and call this sheet single stock. Great. So with this single stock sheet, what we'll do is we'll test the Google Finance functions. What does Google Finance functions do? Well, Google Finance functions are an interface from the Google Sheets to access data from finance markets, from stock markets around the world. And the Google Finance page, it's also using that internally. So, and it's exposing that into the Google Sheet functions. So let's have a look at that. So there is an example. I'll just copy this and paste that. Okay, I need to add an equal sign there and see what happens. Oh, that's a lot. Let's have a closer look what this does. So the Google Finance function, it takes first a ticker symbol, then attributes describing what part of that stock information you want to retrieve. And then there is a start date and an end date and an interval for historic data, which we actually don't want. We don't want historic data. So let me delete that. There we go. So now we'll just get a single value, which is the price for Google at that time. So the next thing, what we're going to do is we just have another closer look here and open the help in the sites panel and see what information we can request using Google Finance function. So there is the attributes are optional. By default, you always get the price. There's the price, and there is the high and the low of the day's price. Then we get the volume. Down there is the change, and we also get the change in percentage, which is great, and that's actually what we want. So let us make this function a bit more flexible. And let's say I use this field to enter the ticker symbol. I'll enter there. That's my Google. Then what I want to request is then the Google Finance from, and whatever the user enters here, I want to get the data. So now that's the Google, then that's, for example, Apple or Microsoft has this symbol, and we'll get the details there. Let's now compare it with what we have prepared in the composition. There is the name, the ticker. So let me add a field for the name. We have a field for the ticker. We want to have the price, the change, the high, the low, and the volume. There we go. And now we're going to have a closer look at this, at the function. The second argument here is the attribute. And now we define the attribute actually in this column. So we just click here to take the attribute. And then what we also do here, in addition, we just can drag and drop that down here. But first, lock down the cell C3, because that's where we put our stock symbol here, the ticker symbol, and we want that all these cells take this cell as an input for the stock symbol, and the cell left next to it as the attribute. Great. So now when I use, for example, Apple, we'll get an update from Apple. When we look at Google, we get an update from Google. Well, and up here, I'll just enter the name manually. Good. So there's one really nice feature about Google Sheets, which is built in and which you can utilize. It's when you handle data, and when you work with data, you can use format functions. So in this case, the price is in dollars, high is dollars, low is dollars, and the volume, I want to format that slightly different. I want to format that as a number. Well, I don't need, I need the comma signs, the change. I want to have a plus sign there, which is, let's have a look here. So now I have a plus, and probably add some more digit after the comma. So now again, when I just swap to Apple, I'll get the latest values from Apple. Great. So there's one more feature which I want to show there, because stock data, they dynamically change. And when you activate within your Google Sheet settings, the calculation feature, the recalculation of all formulas within the Google Sheet shall be triggered on change by default. So when you change a value that the formula references to, it's recalculating. But I also want to have it automatically recalculated every minute. So this means that now the formulas which I have here, the Google Finance formula, recalculates these values every minute and automatically updates that. And also this recalculation is done on the backend. It happens on the Google servers, which then update your Google Sheet. So, but now, so far so good. Let's have a look at the app script.
Really quick, Thomas, so that means that you can close out your Google Sheet and you can rely on it to be doing that while you don't have to be inside of the sheet for it to run a request every minute.
Yeah, absolutely right. This automatically happens just on the back end, and Google server manage that. So what I'll do is I'll just add a few functions I copy and paste that you don't need to watch me typing. So what we use here is range. So that's where I added the function range value, and it takes the values of the range, which is defined in this parameter. For the single cell, we'll just request the single value, and there it's value. Well, that's not a lot different. So then I have another function that's called read single stock details. What this function does, it reads this range. Let us check if that's the proper range. It's C2, B2 to C8. It's B2 to C8, and it's called single stock, so that should be fine. And then whatever we get in return. What we get in return, well, let's have a look at that. Let me first save it. I have to save it to get the function updated here in the dropdown. So now when we look at that, what we'll get in return in the stock details is an array, a multi-dimensional array where we have the name and the value, the ticker and the value which we want to send, the price and the value which we want to send into the payload to Singular. And this function down there, it converts this array into the JSON structure that we require for Singular. So good. Then the last function I need to copy is
and he's copying it from the, like I said, the one that we've prepped that's complete in the template description.
Yeah. So, and this function sends single stock details. It sends the payload to the composition single stock details, and it reads these. It calls this function to read it. This function then returns the JSON that we actually want to send. So now when we just use that, there we go. We should see something. Yeah, we see it updating. We see the apple, the price and the change, the high, the low, and the volume. Now we just change this back to Google. There we go. And when we
the reason that name field didn't change, if you remember, is because we did that manually. So if you were to change, Thomas, if you were to switch that ticker symbol back to Apple, we would still see Google in place because that's a manual input field.
I didn't make that, so
just in case you were wondering why that didn't.
The ticker
change
symbol is APPL. There we go. So this is now right. APPL. There we go.
Is it APL? Is it 2 P's or just one?
Maybe I'm typing it wrong. Let's take Microsoft, because this one I know. There we go.
Okay.
It must be it.
There we go.
Okay, and now when I send it, it updates.
There it is.
There is still a difference, which I like to point out. There we have formatted values, and we don't have them here yet. But that's pretty easy to fix. There is a function.
AAPL is the Apple spelling.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
So range display values. We want to have the display values, and the display values they return the values that the formatted values of the sheet. I'll just run this now, and now we get the
Cool.
dollar signs and the values formatted as we have defined it here. Great. So good.
Can we, and you could assign that script again to a button, correct? If you wanted to.
Absolutely, absolutely right. And you just mentioned one thing which is quite important, and I almost forgot. By activating the recalculation on every minute for the Google Sheet, what this does, it just updates the Google data in the Google Sheet app. It doesn't send data to Singular. If you want to do that, you have to define a trigger.
So what you're saying is you have to create a trigger to say, send this data to Singular X amount of times.
Right. And by adding a trigger, I can select the function which should be executed. And time-driven, well, a minute timer, let's say, send it every minute and save.
So now you don't even have to click a button. Then
now
it's just going to automatically run that trigger.
Absolutely. I don't need to click the button. The trigger in the Google Sheet makes sure that the Google servers read the latest data every minute. And the trigger in the app script is then automatically taking the latest data and send it every minute to the Singular composition. So in this way, you can close your Google Sheet, you can shut down your PC, your Colab, and will still update and show the latest values for these stock tickers. Okay, so we are already running a bit late. So what I'll probably do is I'll just skip or just show you a sheet which I've prepared earlier. That's regarding the multi-stocks. There are a few things I want to point out. And for the multi-stocks example, which then updates the table widget in the Singular composition, we've prepared the labels up here, and I've added drop downs, which are pretty easy to define. You'll just use the data validation for that, and you can define then a lookup table which you want with the values you want the user to pick, and then here I'm using a lookup function which takes this cell as the key, and there is the reference where of the range of the table I want to look up, and it's the lookup table A2 to B11. So let's have a look at that. That's A2 to B11. So that's exactly this range. And then this function takes then an index, which means which column of that, or which matching column of that lookup table do I want to display in this particular cell. And that's column 2, which is, this would be column 1, that's column 2. And then there is an option where you can define if is it sorted or not. In our case, it's not sorted. And so we can just select, use these drop downs to select Google, to select there is Apple, there it's AAPL, perfect. And then this cell updates, and these cells down here, they take the ticker symbol from column C, and the details we want to request from row number 3 here. Okay, so let's have a look at the composition script there. And there I already have it, have those functions added. That's actually pretty simple. The multi-stocks details it reads the cells from the range we have defined here, which is this one. What we need to build for Singular is a JSON structure that takes the content in the row number 3 and adds it as a key for all the values which are below there. And so what we do here is...
Really quick on that, Thomas, the reason that it needs to be prepared in a JSON format is because the table widget accepts JSON. Is that right?
Right. The table widget, it accepts and it requires JSON, and that the JSON, when we look into this here, it has the format that there are, for each line of the table widget, there is one JSON object describing the data there, and the data have key names. And we use these key names and then here within the table subcomposition as control node names. And the table widget maps then the keys from the JSON to these control nodes, and then, of course, updates the linked text and widget properties.
Yeah, so the table widget is sort of an advanced widget. So it might take a second if you haven't used it before to wrap your head around what's going on. But once you get the hang of it, it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, and yeah, this function, there are nested for loops that then create out of the, we can quickly look at it. Let's send this multi-stock details and add a stop point there. So when you look at the stock details that are returned, so that's an array. That's the first row where we have our keys for the JSON. The second, third, and down, there are the content. We want to use this as a key. Then we'll just skip that. There we go. And stop here and have a look at the content, where we now have all our JSON fields, where this is the keys that which we then later need in the control nodes, and that's the content for the control nodes. And when we send that, we should see the result. The reason why we don't see it is because our API URL is a different one, and that's actually good. So you also, when you download and copy the Google Sheet, you need to update your API URL,
yeah,
so that the Google Sheet communicates with your particular control app. So now
so it's the one thing that you'll need to modify. And the reason he modified it there, you can see that you've got 2 tabs up. This is a different script, that your own personal script file. So that has all of those payloads in there, yeah, with a different previous app key.
Okay, so now, of course, when we change that, let's change that to mdux and this to dux. So we have some German values. And again, we just run this command, so those values then update. Yes, probably one thing which I'd like to show you and to point out is that you can see the executions which you've run, and you also see the status there. It seems that there are a lot of failed executions. Don't know exactly what happens. There are completed executions. That's what we just recently done. Maybe I've changed something, and then there is still an automatic timer running, like this function. This is a time-driven function and triggered, and it's called the update composition. We just look here at the triggers that are defined. There is one time-based, and that's the update composition function. And the update composition function here is what does it do? It updates the single stock and multi-stock details. So both functions then here, both subcompositions automatically update. Okay, so now let's have a look. Well, if you have any questions, please just post them into the chat or send us an email also later, or post a ticket to the support portal later. Last but not least, a function which I think is really neat with Google Sheets, that allows you to integrate with RSS sources in any way. And this function is called the import feed function. So again, the import feed function, there is you'll find good description and a lot of details on the Google web pages, and Catherine will paste the links into the chat so you can follow up with it. Excuse me. So what I have here is I'm using the import feed function here, and the first argument is the URL, which I have here, and I'm using the RSS feed from BBC England or News About London. Then the second one is a query that allows me to define which data I want to send or to request. Then you can define if I want to have the headers or not. And the last one is the number of items. So let's have a look. There are two queries that I can define. One is the items, the other one is about the feed, which gives me details about the feed, like the title, description, and the URL to the feed. And I even can just add another option, like I just want to have the feed URL. In our case, we'll stay with the items. That's actually the content and all the elements in the feed. Headers can be true or false. The headers define if there is headers available. Sometimes you need it, sometimes not. In our case, we don't care, but it's nicer when they are there, so you know what each of the comments do. And of course, the number of items you want to query. So that's now 10, or it's just 4 or 5. That's the fourth argument.
And this is importing from the most recent at the top to the oldest, is that correct? Although I know that we looked into it, and sometimes that's,
yeah.
No, that's right. It depends on the feed, I think, how the data comes in. It
depends a little bit on the feed, but it's usually always from top to bottom how they are published, or actually how they are updated. So created doesn't necessarily mean that that's the latest update of it.
I see.
So there might be some new content being added. So let's have a look at the functions. So there is the function that reads the RSS feed message, and that's the RSS ticker B7 to E10. That's B7 to E10. So that's the first 4 one, which is fine. So what we see here, and so we just remember a little bit what we've discussed previously with the RSS tick, with the text ticker, is that whenever you add an enter, for example, or a new line, the text ticker interprets that as a new message itself. So now this yellow message header is separated from the message itself. So that's something we need to take a little bit care of, because Google adds, unfortunately, and I haven't found out why, a new line after, sometimes into the summary text, even if there is none on the RSS feed. So this is what we address in this little function. You can have a look at that more in detail than in your version of the Google Sheet. So what this basically does is this function, it builds a long string where each message is separated by a new line, but the text which is in the third column, which is this one, we replace all new lines if there is one with an empty space.
Which is often the case with RSS, and almost all the time there seems to be a return in the text.
Okay, good. And then there we go. We have the RSS sent these feed messages to Singular. We can test this function. Now it's down there, and we'll send it. And we see that there is the BBC News, and now the new messages are coming in. Well, let me change that from yellow to probably light green, which is a little bit nicer. When I'll update that, then the next message that comes in has this light green color. Okay, so I know this was a long session, a lot of information. I'm sure it was pretty intense. We'll share the link, and also just when you download the composition from the Singular Marketplace, you have the link to copy a finished version of the Singular, of the corresponding Google Sheet.
I'm going to post a direct link to that template if for whatever reason you can't find it in the template library. Here, template. And then I'm also going to post, which I said is in the description, but I'm going to post the link to the Google Sheet, and it's a copy link. So right when you click on it, it's going to request that you duplicate it in your own account if you're signed into Google. So, but again, those will be available in the template library.
What I want to mention and to show you is Google Sheets, and for Google Sheets and for Google Apps in general, there are a lot of add-ons available that can connect to a number of APIs, that can connect to cryptocurrencies, or to Facebook, or to Twitter messages, and a lot more. And I would like to encourage you, just add some of those add-ons to your Google Sheets, download them, and then you're able and capable in testing them. And some of them, they are really, really good. Let me probably just show you this crypto one, which I've tested this morning. And what this allows you to do, it allows you to browse all kind of sources of crypto APIs, select and request, or you can preview it, and you get a lot of data from this particular one. So here you get the ID, you get a link to the icon, and a lot of latest trades. When I insert it into my Google Sheet, this creates a new sheet with all the latest data of crypto currencies ranked. So what you can imagine then it's pretty easy that you just request a range and send that data then, well, every minute, every 5 minutes, or on request to the Google Sheet, and you'll have the latest data there. Another one is that we just saw before the webinar is this one.
Yeah, we discovered it today.
Yeah, and it allows you to connect to Twitter and to your Twitter account, and then read all tweets from that account into a Google Sheet. But most of, or some of those extensions, they need an extra license. There are some payment points for testing. You have limited calls, or just a limited number of API calls available. And it seems that we ran out of the API calls here. We've tested it probably a little bit.
Yeah.
So we can add a new one. But feel encouraged to explore the Google Marketplace with all the add-ons that are available there. It's really worth doing that. Well, there's just one more thing I'd like to show you, and it's a Google Sheet that we prepared a while ago for a production, and it's this one.
Cool.
Some of you might have probably seen it or know it. But this is a Google Sheet for a quiz show. So we have all the questions here, and there are the answers. Then this index defines which answer is the right one. So it highlights then the cells. That's all just using standard Google functions. And then you have three players playing against each other. There is the counter there, and when the player answered the question properly, then this is just using a sum function to calculate the score. What we've added here to this sheet,
is the cool bit, I think.
Yeah, it's a Google add-on for this particular sheet, and this is using a bit HTML, a little bit of CSS, but basically it's using then the Singular REST API to control this production. So you can use that as a control application there. So let's start the show. So then there we name the three players: show player 1, player 2, player 3, and we use that in OBS, and then you could see the live video feed of the players on these right panels. And
so this is the actual show output that you're seeing right here in your Google control interface.
Yeah, that's the actual output URL, which is here. Then you can select the question. Let's start with question number 6. Show the question. So it's being shown there that the timer is counting down. When the timer is down and our 3 players voted, you can click the button to highlight the right vote. It's also indicated here. Update the score. Here we go, and then just go to the next question and just play and continue this until you're at the end of the game. So this is just an idea to hopefully a little bit inspire you what you actually can use Google Sheets for, and how you can make it very productive for specific use cases.
Cool.
Back to you, Catherine.
That's it. I mean, does anybody have any questions or requests for a future webinar beyond the part 3 that we already have scheduled for next week? If not, we're just gonna pick something, which is fine. I might want to see one where we're actually digging into that add-on a little bit, but that seems like it's fairly sophisticated to build a custom add-on like that. Is that accurate?
Well, this is building the add-on. Well, it's a bit more complicated.
Yeah,
but at the end, it's a bit CSS HTML, JavaScript code, jQuery, and the functionality of the add-on itself has very little to do with Singular itself. The part that regards to Singular, it's very, very little. It's like this Singular put function sending API calls. So there are a lot of examples available in the Google Docs for it. Okay, let's look at.
We do have. I'm sorry. We have a question here about reference documentation on the product in general. We have a support portal with a lot of different documentations on different topics, but in terms of like these data webinars, we have a developer portal. So it really just depends on what you're looking for. But if you reach out to us through the support portal through a ticket and you have any specific questions, we can answer them if you haven't been able to find an article on it. We try to keep it updated. Yeah, you drop those into the chat here.
That's the.
And those are on the website as well. If you actually go to the singular.live website, there's a resources tab with some resources for you. Is that it? I think that's it, Thomas.
Good. Well, then thank you for staying with us. And
yes, thank you.
Yes, please send us your questions and suggestions, what you would like us to cover in the next webinar, where we focus on composition scripting and how you can utilize composition scripting for working with data, for integrating data, and also for automating some specific topics within the composition.
Cool. All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you for joining. Bye.
Thank you.